Murdered, a podcast. I'm your host, AB. And this week on Mama Murdered, a podcast, we're finally diving into part 3. This will also be the final part of the Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn case. Last week we left off on Denise being dropped off on the road near where her mom lived in Southern California, and the man who has been solely referred to as the Voice hadn't done exactly like he'd promised, and he dropped Denise off after holding her captive in a house for 48 hours, even though her boyfriend Aaron had gone against what the Voice said, and he had contacted the police and made them aware of Denise's being kidnapped. Denise's boyfriend Aaron had contacted the police to let them know that men had broken into his house and then kidnapped Denise. But then the police accused Aaron of killing Denise. Aaron had finally gotten fed up and had enough, and he decided that it would probably be in his best interest to just get a lawyer. And shortly after Aaron got a lawyer, the police received a proof of life recording from the kidnappers, proving that Denise was still alive. Police had contacted Aaron, and he had been able to verify for police, detectives, and FBI agents that the voice on the proof of life recording did actually belong to Denise. We've covered a whole lot in these last 2 episodes in this case, so as always, if you haven't already, then I would highly suggest that you go back and listen to the first 2 parts of this case before you ever try to start here, or else this episode may not make a whole lot of sense to you. Now, with all of that being said, and without further ado, let's get it. So, Denise was released on the corner of the road that her mom lived on with her overnight bag, her purse, and her work bag. The Voice had taken all of Denise's bags with them when he'd kidnapped her from Aaron's house. So, Denise was dropped off close by where her mom lived, so she headed straight to her mom's house first, but she didn't have any luck there. Her mom wasn't home. So then Denise tried to get into her mom's house because she was trying to do exactly what the Voice had told her to do. So she was trying not to draw attention to herself and not to cause a scene, but she wasn't able to get into her mom's house. So Denise decided from here that she would head to the next door neighbor's house to see if anyone were home there. This neighbor was someone that Denise had known for her entire life, but they weren't home either. So Denise goes back to her mom's house, and she leaves all of her bags on her mom's patio before she kept walking. And eventually, Denise ran into a man who was doing some road work a little ways down from her mom's house. Denise asked this man if she could use his phone, and Denise went ahead and called both of her parents, but both of their phones went directly to voicemail. So she left a message for both of her parents on their voicemails, and she was just kind of telling them that she was okay, and she even explained to both of them on the voicemails that she had started at her mom's house, but tells them that she was headed to her dad's house now. So she even kind of mapped out the route that she was walking so that they would know exactly where to find her if they did hear these voicemails before she was able to find them. But I'm sure both of her parents were in Vallejo at this point because that's where Denise had been taken from, so that's the police department that would have been doing the investigation into finding her. Except for Vallejo Police Department wasn't really doing shit to find her, but that's besides the point. So when Denise finally does make it to her dad's house, he wasn't home either, and again, he's probably in Vallejo. But while Denise was at her dad's house, a neighbor saw Denise, and once the neighbor realized that Denise was Denise, she asked if there was anything that she could do to help. Obviously, at this point, Denise's kidnapping was all over the news, the radio, newspapers, etc. It was everywhere. Everybody knew that Denise had been kidnapped. So this neighbor asked Denise if there was anything that she could help her with, and Denise just kind of asked if she could use her neighbor's restroom. By the time that Denise finishes up in the restroom and walks back out into the neighbor's living room, there were already 2 police officers walking into this neighbor's house. The officers asked Denise to verify her name, and one of the officers sits down inside of the neighbor's house with Denise to kind of ask her to go through what all had happened to her so that they could get a statement. Denise tells this officer every single thing that Aaron had been saying for this entire time. That men woke both her and Aaron up in the middle of the night with lasers and guns, and that she was kidnapped. Denise tells these officers about having to tie Aaron up with zip ties. She tells them about the swim goggles and the pre-recorded messages that the kidnappers had played for them through the headphones. She tells them everything that Aaron had been saying this whole time. Then Denise gives them a short summary about being driven to a house, and then she tells them about the bedroom that she was held in, and about the Voice, who was the main kidnapper. Officers ask Denise questions, and Denise answers them to the best of her ability. Then the officer asks Denise if she knew what kind of car the Voice drove and what color it is. And Denise explained that the exhaust on the car sounded like a Mustang and that she did think that she'd seen a snippet of the car and she thought it was white. Now, Denise had been able to see the white during one of the times that she was able to kind of crack her eyes open through the tape for a few seconds. But she does tell the officer that she's not positive about the make or model or even the color of the car. So then the officer tells Denise that the CSI team is on its way and that they're going to collect, evidence. But with every question, Denise is getting more and more anxious. And then she notices that one of the officers that's asking her questions is also holding a voice recorder. And so this makes her realize that she's probably being recorded. Everything she says is being recorded. And then that makes her nervous, because she didn't want to say something that the voice had told her not to say. And then she realized that she may need a lawyer to help navigate just the question in itself. She realized that a lawyer is going to make navigating through this entire thing a lot easier. So Denise tells the officer that she'd like to speak to an attorney, and they tell her that the detectives will help her get in touch with an attorney shortly. So Denise is telling those officers everything that the voice had told her about their organization and what they do and the people that hire them, etc., etc., etc. Denise explained that she tried to remain calm while she was in captivity, and she tells the officers that she didn't want to give these men a reason to make things any worse than they already had been. Denise starts hearing patrol cars and officers pull up outside of the neighbor's house. She can hear what sounds like helicopters flying over top of the house, and she can also hear dogs barking outside of the neighbor's house. Denise tried to explain to the officers that the voice did say that she could talk to the police. He also said that she could answer most of their questions, but that she needed to be careful with what she says and what information she gives to police. Then the officer asked Denise one of the questions that she'd been dreading having to answer. He asked Denise if she was sexually assaulted while she was in captivity. And of course, as we know, she was. Then Denise is asked how she was treated, and she tells the officers that for the most part, it wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been. She explains that she was allowed to use the restroom and shower and things like that, but at this point, Denise had been sitting at this neighbor's house for over an hour, just waiting on her parents to show up. The CSI team wasn't there yet, Vallejo detectives weren't there yet. It was just these two officers that happened to get the call when the 911 call came in that she had been released. Then Denise thought about it, and she asked these two officers if any of the things that she talks to the detectives about will be made public. Both of these officers assure her that nothing that she said to the detectives can be made public. And then one of the officers tells Denise that they are, quote-unquote, treating her like a victim before he corrects himself and says something like, you are the victim. And let's just all take a minute and collectively agree that this will be our first red flag of this episode. And then finally, after what I'm sure felt like a lifetime, Denise's Aunt Jody and her cousin Nick both come running through the door at this random neighbor's house to come in and greet Denise. And at this point, Denise was just happy to see somebody in her family, anybody. And you're probably wondering why Denise's aunt and cousin were there to greet Denise instead of her parents. And like we were already suspecting, Denise's parents were in Vallejo trying to get back to her once they'd gotten the voicemails, that she'd left saying that she'd been released and that she was okay. So Denise's dad had actually called one of the dads of Denise's best friend from childhood because he lived right down the road. And when her best friend's dad showed up, officers wouldn't let him pass the sidewalk. So her best friend's dad had actually called Denise's dad back and told him hey, I'm not really sure what's going on, but they won't let me inside to see Denise. But he does say that he would advise Denise get a lawyer pronto, which is always, good advice. So Denise's dad calls her cousin Nick, who was a newly graduated lawyer, to head over to the house where Denise was. So that's really the only reason that Denise's Aunt Jody and her cousin Nick had even been let inside to see Denise, is because the officers guarding the outside of the house, Nick had to show representation saying that he was a lawyer, that he was going to be representing Denise. But with Denise being the victim, I still don't understand why the cops wouldn't let anyone from outside go in to just see and check on her. I get the evidence thing, but nothing happened at this neighbor's house. The only evidence is Denise. They could tell them, not to hug each other or, try not to touch anything. But why wouldn't they just let somebody peek their head in and just check on somebody that's been missing for 48 hours? And like I said, when Denise's aunt went in to hug her, the officers were sitting there hey, don't touch her until CSI gets here. you're potentially damaging evidence. Which, I mean, I get that they need DNA and stuff, but it seems a little weird. Like, they could have just gone about it better, I guess. Now, I never said that Denise's cousin Nick was a criminal attorney. I just said that he was an attorney. Which, he was an attorney. He was just a property attorney. So, I mean, he would do in a pinch to at least get Denise to some part of her family. So, Nick pulls his quote-unquote client to the side, and he asks Denise if she wanted to go to the station to talk to police or if she wanted to go home first. Nick tells Denise that she will eventually need to go to the station to give her statement and stuff, but he tells her that she can go home and she can go to the station later if she wants to. And Denise tells him that she really wanted at this moment just to go somewhere safe. Anywhere with family, anywhere safe. So Nick goes to tell the officers that they're going to let Denise go home and rest, and then she'll come by and give her statement later on. And it was so sweet because in the book, Denise says that she watched from a distance as Nick told these officers that she wasn't going to the station right this second, and that they would have to get a statement from Denise later. And she says that even though the officers are so much taller than Nick, and they seem to have, like, so much more authority than Nick, she said that in that moment, she felt like she was watching her knight in shining armor save her. And it was just the cutest thing, y'all. You all gotta read this book, I swear. Once Nick tells the officers that Denise is leaving with him, CSI was finally brought in to take pictures of Denise's body and clothes, etc. Denise says that this entire interaction with the CSI crew seemed rushed, and she even felt like they were doing it like half-assed, as if they were just going through the motions and not actually trying to collect evidence that may be able to find her kidnappers. So Denise tells the CSI crew that the water bottle that she has and the shoes that she's wearing are both things that the kidnappers had given her. They weren't her things. But the CSI crew didn't take either one of those as evidence. So once the CSI crew is done snapping their few pictures and doing the absolute bare minimum, one of the officers tells Denise that there is a Vallejo detective on the phone that would like to speak with her before she leaves. And this is when Denise's cousin Nick swoops in to be her knight in shining armor again, because instead of making Denise talk to this detective, Nick takes the phone instead. And guess who was on the phone asking to speak to Denise before Nick took the phone? You guessed it, good old Detective Mustard. Yeah, the same Detective Mustard that had been telling Aaron that he was so sure that Denise was dead and that he'd killed her. He said that he would be willing to go ahead and go to Denise's family's house and let them know that Aaron had killed her and that they were only looking for her body now. And then now here he is, looking like a full-fledged asshole with Denise being released, and now she won't even talk to him on the phone. She has her attorney cousin on the phone with him instead. I'm sure this really hurt his precious male ego. I'm off that rant, so Nick gets on the phone with the Detective Mustard instead of making Denise talk to him. And Denise says during this phone call that Cousin Nick's face had gone from confused to more or less alarmed. And she said when he hung up the phone, Nick told Denise that Detective Mustard is offering her something called a proffer of agreement. And then he explains to Denise that this is basically like an immunity agreement. Denise is like, an immunity for what? Nick tells her that he's not sure just yet. So this already does not sound good, y'all. It already ain't sounding good. Then Nick tells Denise that Aaron is at the police station in Vallejo and that according to Detective Mustard, the detectives were going to offer this same immunity agreement to Aaron too. Nick then tells Denise that whichever of the two of them takes the immunity agreement first will be the only one who's granted immunity in this deal. Obviously, Denise is legitimately so confused at this point, because why would either of them need immunity? They didn't do anything. Nick tells Denise that they first need to get her out of here for the time being. So officers cleared out the back alleyway of this neighbor's house, and they took Denise out of the back side of the house to avoid the media circus that had formed out front. Which, this didn't actually do much good because there was still camera crews and news reporters out back of the neighbor's house when Denise walked out. Denise had to get into a patrol car where she was driven a block or so away to get into Nick's car. And from here, Nick drove Denise back to their Aunt Karen's house so that they could wait on the rest of her family. And when Nick and Denise got to their Aunt Karen's house, there was a swarm of media and news stations there as well. They had all been camping out at different family members of Denise's for the last 2 days. All of these, like, media and news outlets. And I think this is the first time that Denise realized how big her kidnapping story had actually got. But Nick helped Denise wiggle through the press and the media, and they get inside where Denise is finally greeted by a few other members of her family. And shortly after Denise arrives at her Aunt Karen's house, that's when Denise is finally able to get in touch with her Uncle Jeff, who is also an attorney. Now, Uncle Jeff informed Denise that the police didn't believe that she'd been kidnapped, and that the police didn't believe that some random men had broken into Erin's house during the middle of the night just to take her. The police didn't believe any of this, so Denise's Uncle Jeff advises her that she needs to get a criminal defense attorney, and then Uncle Jeff advises Denise that she is not to speak to anyone in law enforcement anymore until she has a criminal defense attorney that is by her side. Uncle Jeff explains to Denise that she had already given a statement to the officers that had been at the neighbor's house with her. He tells Denise that she can't talk to anyone besides him or Nick about what happened to her, because he and Nick are both attorneys, so any conversation that they had would be protected by attorney-client privilege. Denise is obviously so super confused. Could you imagine being woken up in the middle of the night at your boyfriend's house, kidnapped for ransom, raped while you're there, returned 2 days later, only to not be believed? This is mind-boggling. And Denise immediately started to wonder if maybe somebody in the police department was in on the kidnapping. Maybe that's why they were trying to spin this narrative that her and Erin had made this entire kidnapping story up. But she's not sure. She's left alone for a short time after this call with her Uncle Jeff, and a little while later, her cousin Nick comes back into the room where Denise was sitting, and Nick explains that he had just spoken to Detective Mustard again. This time Detective Mustard was aggressive and basically just making accusations. Detective Mustard had asked cousin Nick to relay a message to Denise. And essentially, Detective Mustard wanted Denise to know that he knew that this story was a hoax, a lie, a fib, a story. And he also wanted to let her know that Erin was sitting right across from him right then, and that the first one to accept this immunity deal would be the only one to get immunity. So Nick does relay this message from Detective Mustard to Denise, and Nick says that during this, he kept saying that he was done listening to this Navy SEAL bullshit, which that immediately made Denise wonder if he was referring to the statement about the kidnappers wearing wetsuits. So cousin Nick did tell Denise all the stuff that Detective Mustard had said, and basically Nick told Mustard that Denise was seeking legal counsel before she agreed to anything and before she gave another statement. Now, after all of this that she's already been through, now Denise is having to worry about the police, the detectives, and the investigators even believing her story, which is wild. Now, shortly after this, Denise is finally able to speak to her mom for just a few minutes. And Denise's mom tells her that the main detective was almost acting pissed off that Denise was even found alive, which again is hella weird. Denise's mom also told her that Detective Mustard had said something about the frogmen in frog suits or something to that effect. Denise's mom asked why she doesn't just come to the police station and talk to the police so she can tell them the truth. Because her mom's thinking about it like, if you tell them the truth, then you can't get in trouble. But Denise says in her book that she knew almost immediately after the first interaction that cousin Nick had had with Detective Mustard that something wasn't right, and Denise wasn't wrong. Now, eventually, Denise's Uncle Jeff got in touch with an attorney in Orange County to represent Denise. Once Denise talks to this attorney, he asks Denise how well she knows Erin, and he asks if she thought Erin would take this immunity deal. And once the attorney explained it to Denise about how and why someone might take this kind of immunity agreement even if they were telling the truth, Denise started to piece together the fact that even though she and Erin were both telling the truth, if detectives were threatening to charge someone with making a false statement, then that said person would serve prison time if those charges stuck. So even if they weren't lying, someone might take this kind of immunity deal just to avoid prison time. So once all of this was explained, Denise's criminal defense attorney, Doug, told Denise not to get on a plane that the FBI had waiting for her to take her back to the Vallejo Police Department. Doug told Denise that letting her get onto the FBI's plane would essentially be the equivalent of him letting her get into the mouth of a great white shark, which I feel like that statement alone says a lot. Doug tells Denise that she needs to make her way to Orange County where he is, and she needs to do that as quickly as possible. And Denise's attorney, Doug, his wife had just given birth the day before Denise was released. Doug had actually been planning on taking a 3-month-long paternity leave, but he was just so enthralled with Denise's story that he and his wife had spoken about it, and they'd both agreed that Denise was going to need a good defense attorney that cared that she was the victim and not the perpetrator. So Doug and his wife are the real MVPs. We love Doug and his wife over here. Denise was able to get a flight to go meet Doug, and it's crazy because Doug made Denise check in with him at every single point until she made it to his office. Denise had to call Doug when she got to the airport, when she made it through security, when she boarded the plane, when the plane landed, when she got off the plane, when her family picked her up. He literally made her keep in touch with him throughout every single stop that she had to make up until Denise made it to his office. And Doug later told her that he did this just in case the police tried to detain her at any point for any reason. He would know exactly where she had been last so that he would be able to get to her as quickly as possible. But what Denise didn't know while she was catching a few flights and fighting rush hour traffic to make it to Doug is that the Vallejo Police Department had recently released a statement about Denise and Aaron's story. On the same day that Denise had been released from her kidnappers, the Vallejo Police Department said, quote, "Today there is no evidence to support the claims that this was a stranger abduction or an abduction at all, due to the facts that we have been presented thus far. This appears to be an orchestrated event and not a kidnapping." So, with all of that being said to the public and by the police, Doug eventually explains to Denise that she has two options. She can either talk to the police, but if she does that, then she'll have to tell the police everything and not hold anything back. Because if she does decide to talk to the police and she does leave something out, then police are definitely going to look at that like she's either making a false statement or like she's lying. Which honestly, just from the statement that the police had already given, it already seems like they don't believe Denise or Aaron. And Denise's second option was to not speak to police about what happened at all. But then there would be a downside to this option too, though. If Denise didn't talk to the police, then her kidnappers would be free to do this to somebody else and they would never be caught. Denise decided that it was her best and only option would be to speak to the police and the FBI and hopefully get her kidnappers and captors caught. So her attorney Doug gets in touch with an officer. And Doug explains that Denise wasn't just kidnapped, but that she was also raped. And for whatever reason, the officer says that Doug could bring Denise in the next morning to have a rape kit done. Mind you, this phone call is happening at around 2 a.m. The longer you wait to do a rape kit, the less helpful it becomes. The officer tells Doug to bring Denise in at 10 a.m. the next morning and to make sure that she doesn't shower, change her clothes, wash her hands, brush her teeth, or anything else that would, eliminate evidence. Now, at this point, it had already been almost a full day since Denise was released, and she was basically just told to wait a little bit longer to wash this random man off of her body. But after this phone call, Doug finally told Denise what she had been waiting to hear this entire time, and that's that her parents were on the way and they were coming to get her now. So Denise's mom, dad, and brother show up, and they're finally reunited with Denise. The reunion doesn't last long, though. Just long enough for a hug, and that's it, because Doug wanted to take Denise and her parents into his office so that they could go over their plans for the following day. And it's while they're all sitting in this office going over the game plan that it's confirmed for Denise's parents for the first time that she had in fact been raped. Because again, up to this point, they had only gotten to speak to her for a brief time while she was at the neighbor's house, and that's not exactly the first thing you want to tell your parents. So now everybody knows the plan. Denise goes back to her hotel room that her parents had been staying at, and they try to get some rest. That was at about 6 a.m. And of course, no one had gotten much sleep since Denise had been reported missing 3 days before this, and they're all finally able to get at least a few hours of sleep. So now let's jump back a little bit about how Aaron found out about Denise, that she had been released by the kidnappers and that she was okay and at least alive. So Agent Vinny and Detective Mustard essentially tell Aaron that Denise had been released, and Aaron just can't wrap his mind around why these kidnappers would have released Denise without ever even getting their ransom. And one of his attorneys throws out the possibility that this group is maybe trying to build their resume in a way. like doing these kinds of jobs just to see if they can get away with them so that they can kind of put that on their resume to make other people want to hire them. Now, Erin watched the same press conference where Vallejo police basically say that they don't believe Erin or Denise's story, but he wasn't able to talk to Denise or even check in on her throughout this entire first day that she had been released. And Vallejo police and detectives had tried to talk Erin into signing that same immunity deal that they had offered to Denise. And again, why would either one of them sign this when they're the victims and they haven't done anything wrong? So, back at the hotel room with Denise and her family, it's the next morning, and Denise, her family, and her attorney Doug all head down to the station where Denise's clothes are taken in for evidence before the detectives get her statement. Denise says that she could overhear an officer ask her attorney about a lie detector test, and Doug basically told that officer that they both knew that he wasn't going to let Denise take a lie detector test. They may as well drop it. From here, Denise is taken into an interrogation room with none other than Detective Mustard himself. Denise says that every question that he asked her felt like a trick or an attack of some kind. And Denise explained to him that she overcalculated every move that she made while she was in captivity. She says that she weighed her options against her risk, and that's why she never tried to escape her kidnappers. Denise says she didn't feel like there was a right way to answer any of these questions that Detective Mustard was asking. They would take a few breaks in between questions, and during one of these breaks, Doug takes a call. When he comes back over to where Denise was waiting for him, he tells Denise that he had just spoken to Erin's lawyer. Doug tells Denise that Erin had also gotten pretty good lawyers that Doug knew and respected, and he tells her that both teams of lawyers are on the same side. Denise and Erin's stories have both matched up at every point in time, and he explains that both of these lawyers were on the same team. They're fighting the good fight, which is what we want. And then at one point during the questioning, Doug excused himself, and he says that he needs to take a call. When he comes back into the interrogation room, he tells Detective Mustard and everybody else sitting in the room with Denise that he has good news. That the kidnappers had sent an email confirming everything that Denise and Erin had been saying this entire time. Which, this was news to everybody. But Denise was told to continue giving her statement. Once she was done answering all the questions and giving her statement for the 30th time since she'd been released, she was then taken to a nearby hospital for the rape kit to finally be done. Detectives had her go to a different hospital than the one that she and Erin worked at because I guess the media would have probably been all over that hospital. And while this is happening, Erin's attorneys put out a press statement of their own, basically telling the public that everything that Vallejo police and detectives have said so far has been a lie. So Vallejo's on TV saying Erin and Denise are lying, and now Erin's lawyers are hitting back with, no sir, your whole department's lying. And Erin's attorneys are just trying to push home the point that he and Denise were in fact victims and not the mastermind behind this whole ordeal. Erin's attorneys told him about the kidnapper sending the email to police, except his attorney let him read the emails. Denise had never gotten to read the emails, but Erin did. And when Erin read these emails, there were things that only the kidnappers would have known, which gave Erin hope that maybe police would finally believe both of them. Now at this point, Denise and Erin both were thinking since the kidnappers had written an email verifying everything that they'd been saying this whole time, that maybe that would be a good thing. But Denise's lawyer, Doug, pointed out the fact that now police think that it's likely that Denise could have written the email and then scheduled the email to be sent at a later time and date so that she would be in the office giving a statement at the time that it was sent. And if y'all are like me, you gotta be wondering, like, why would police think that Denise would have been the one to send this email in the first place? But I guess it doesn't really matter which way you spin it. Police still thought that Denise and Erin were lying. So basically, now police are saying that Denise would have scheduled that email previously so that it would have come through at the exact time that she would be at the station. First of all, she didn't know what time she was going to be at the station. Second of all, that don't even make no damn sense. But both Erin and Denise's attorneys are just telling them to stay calm and to let them handle it. And Erin and Denise still hadn't been able to see each other or speak to each other at this point. Erin ended up spending the night at his best friend's house, and Denise stayed at the hotel room that her parents had rented and been staying in. And still, neither one of them got much sleep that night either. It seems like they hadn't really gotten a good night's sleep since the night before they were woken up in the middle of the night and Denise was taken. But the next morning, Aaron's attorney explains to him that he and Denise still can't see each other until she's done completely with her questioning. And then Aaron's attorney tells him that if the police department wanted to file criminal charges against him or Denise, or both of them, that he and Denise wouldn't be able to see or speak to each other until the trial was over. That could have been years, but thank God that's not what happened, because it was just a few hours after this that Aaron is told that Denise was finally done with her questioning and being interviewed by police. Aaron naturally got kind of excited, thinking that he may be able to actually see and speak to Denise now, but his attorney Amy tells him that Denise says that she still needs time before she's ready to see him. And of course, Aaron's running through all of the worst possible scenarios of why Denise wouldn't want to see or speak to him right away. But shortly after this, Denise is driven to meet with her family so that Doug can talk to Denise and her family all at one time. And once everybody gets seated, Doug asks if any of them had seen the movie Gone Girl, and they all say no. They're confused, and they're not really sure what a movie has to do with Denise being kidnapped. Like, how does a movie fit in here? So, Doug says that the police think that Aaron and Denise had kind of taken the plot from the movie Gone Girl and tried to make it a reality for them. But Doug does tell Denise that police are probably going to try to bring criminal charges against her and Aaron, but he tells her that she's not under arrest yet, so as of right now, she can go and do as she pleases. This is when Denise asks Doug if she can finally see or speak to Aaron, and Doug tells her that she can speak and see whoever she wants to as of now. Denise, of course, doesn't remember Aaron's phone number by heart, and she doesn't have her own cell phone still, so Doug tells Denise that he would reach out to Aaron's lawyer to get his number, and he would give it to her. A few hours later, Doug does give Denise the number to reach Aaron at. But it was late, and Denise knew that she didn't have the emotional energy or the physical energy to be able to see or speak to Aaron that night. So it was the next morning that Denise goes, she gets a new phone, and she tries to figure out what to do next, since she was supposed to be taking her final exam during this week. She was also supposed to be moving into a different apartment. None of those things were happening, obviously. This was just a lot for her to try to figure out all at one time. But her and her family go to lunch, and while they're at lunch, Denise finally tried to call the number that she'd gotten from her attorney, Doug, to get in touch with Aaron. Now, it wasn't Aaron that answered the phone, it was Aaron's brother, Ethan. And Ethan said that Aaron wasn't with him right then, but he did tell Denise that Aaron was super excited to hear from her. So Ethan tells Denise to try to call back in a few hours when he knows he'll be with Aaron. Denise decided to stay with her dad for the time being, and a little while later, Denise's brother and his girlfriend come over. So I guess it would be Denise's almost maybe sister-in-law came over. And this is when Denise learned about the plot to the movie Gone Girl. If you haven't watched this movie, then I'm about to spoil it for you, so you need to skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want it spoiled. This is your warning. I am spoiler alerting the movie Gone Girl. Okay, during this movie, a wife fakes her own death only to try to make it look like her husband is the one who killed her. Plot twist, she's not dead, and the wife did all of this because her husband had cheated on her, and this was the revenge that she was after. So, Denise gets that this sounds like a good movie, but what reason would she have to fake a kidnapping? Like, why would she worry her family, her friends, her patients, all these people for absolutely no reason? It just doesn't make sense for Denise to fake any of this. Now, eventually the few hours pass and Denise tries the number again, and this time Aaron answered the phone when Denise called. And when I tell y'all I was clapping for them, I mean that. They cry on the phone together and they make plans for Aaron to come and see her that evening. And it's during this call that Denise learned that Vallejo police thought that Aaron had killed Denise. Denise hadn't known this little tidbit of information until she was on the phone with Aaron right then. Now, let's give it up for Aaron's brother Ethan right quick, because Ethan is a godsend. So, Ethan drove Aaron to the hotel where Denise was staying with her dad, brother, and Ethan drops Aaron off at the hotel. But he also gave Aaron his credit card because Denise or Aaron, either one, still hadn't gotten their things back. So, they still didn't have their phones, their wallets, their clothes, just none of their own things. Ethan also offers to pay for the hotel room in the same building where Denise's dad's staying so that Aaron and Denise can at least have their own room. Aaron and Denise finally get to talk and they fill each other in on all the crazy shit that's happened in the last few days. and they're basically just glad to be back together at this point. Denise tells Aaron that her kidnappers forced her to have sex with him, and Aaron says that he didn't even think about it, but that he kind of blurted it out and just said, "No, you were raped." And Denise said that that's exactly what she needed to hear. She needed to hear somebody call it rape, because in her head, she'd been trying to downplay it as if this kidnapper was forced to have sex with her, and that's just not the case. And they go on, they're talking, and this is when it registers with them that Denise was kidnapped by a captor, and Aaron was essentially kidnapped by the police after he reached out for help. And after they talked through everything else that had happened to them and everything they'd gone through the last few days, Denise and Aaron spent the rest of the night doing adult things with the only other person who they felt like they could fully trust right then. And it was after this night that Aaron and Denise spent together that the kidnapper sent a second email to police with even more details than the first email. These emails had been sent to a newspaper reporter named Henry Lee, and he's a reporter from the newspaper called The Chronicles, which is wild because the Zodiac Killer also sent letters to a reporter at The Chronicles too. But that's a side note. These emails that were sent from the kidnappers weren't just emails, though. This second email was like a 19-page long letter to the police saying that they needed to recant their statement about Denise and Aaron being suspects. And in this second email, the kidnappers even kind of threatened to hurt police if they don't retract their statements about Denise and Aaron, which again, why is this so weird? Now, it was shortly after this that Aaron was allowed to go back to his house just long enough to get some clean clothes. So his brother Ethan drove him to his house, and when they got there was just so much shit that screams that there was an unknown person, or maybe even more than one unknown persons, inside of Aaron's house. And it's wild to think that police just overlooked all of these different things to be able to call this a hoax. Aaron's brother Ethan even pointed out that Denise and Aaron had been soaking oats for oatmeal overnight when Denise was taken. And Ethan kind of loses his shit just at the sight of the oats being left out soaking on a pot on the stove. Ethan's just kind of like, so the police think that y'all fought like hell and then you decided to make oatmeal for breakfast the next morning? Ethan also mentioned something to the effect of like, why would Aaron kill Denise and then decide to make oatmeal for 2 people afterwards for breakfast the next day? And it's almost like Ethan was just running through all the shit that police had been accusing Aaron of. And it's almost like the police were just actively choosing to ignore evidence. Which is what they did. Within the next week, though, Aaron and Denise tried to hide out at different family and friends' houses together. They just tried to stay out of the public's eye. And for the next couple of months, Denise and Aaron tried to go on with their lives as normally as possible. And police were still working on building a case to prove that Denise and Aaron had made this whole thing up. And it was a few months after Denise had been released that Denise and Aaron were trying to go about their lives, but they got to talking one day, and they realized that Denise had been questioned by a man with a name that Aaron recognized. Remember the agent who Aaron's ex had been having an affair with for more than 2 years before he and his ex Jennifer split up? Yeah. Okay, that was one of the officers that had questioned Denise, but also one of the officers that had not questioned Aaron during the, prime hype of this case. And does this not seem like the biggest kind of conflict of interest? Come on now, why was he even allowed to be anywhere near this case? Especially when you consider the fact that Aaron's ex was the actual intended target and not Denise. That's a little bit crazy to me that they even let this officer anywhere near this case at all whatsoever. That's weird. That's suspicious. And a little while after Denise gets a call from her attorney, Doug, Aaron also gets a call from his attorney, Amy. And both attorneys were calling to let Denise and Aaron know that the FBI had found evidence that may be linked to their case. And Doug, who was Denise's lawyer, is telling her that she's absolutely not going to speak to the FBI for any reason under any circumstances. But Aaron's lawyer, Amy, however, was kind of on the fence about letting Aaron speak to the FBI. But I guess the agents were blowing up Amy's phone, and then they all got word that an entirely new agency had gotten involved with their case. And Amy tells Aaron that the FBI agents are going to come to her office to speak with him. That way, if anything feels off or weird, Amy can just have these agents leave. That way, she doesn't have to worry about, being at their office. And this would at least be a way where Aaron wouldn't have to face the FBI agents by himself. So when Aaron goes in to talk to these agents, guess who's sitting in the chair across from Aaron? Just guess. Yup, the same officer that his ex, Jennifer, had been having an affair with. Luckily, though, this officer wasn't the one taking charge of the interview, and he ended up actually helping in this case, so we can't really be that mad at him. So the agents showed Aaron a picture of a laptop that they think is his. This was a laptop that would have been stolen from his house on the night of the kidnapping. And Aaron tells the agents that, like, yes, this looks like my laptop that was stolen, but there's no way for him to be sure. So then the agents show Aaron a picture of swim goggles with black tape covering both the lenses. And Aaron's, again, he says, like, yes, those look like the same swim goggles that the kidnappers had made both him and Denise wear. But at this point, Aaron still thinks that the FBI is trying to set him up or, like, frame him for something that he didn't do. And this agent must have been able to feel that tension from Aaron, too. Because then he asked Aaron to take a look at a picture. And Aaron says that the man in the picture doesn't look familiar. And that's when the agent just looked Aaron dead in his face and tells him that they found a long blonde hair wrapped up in a pair of the same swim goggles with the blacked out lenses in this man's possession. He also tells Aaron that they very much think that this may have been the man that broke into his house and had taken Denise. And this was the first time since all of this had happened that someone in authority was actually saying it out loud that they now believed Aaron and Denise. And that would all be because of one woman. One badass woman blew this case wide open, y'all. Misty Caruso was at work on the day before her very first day as a detective in Alameda County. Okay. At the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. I'm not saying that again. So she's at this sheriff's office, right? Misty Caruso. And her boss asked her to go execute a search warrant on a house in South Lake Tahoe. And this happened on June 8th. And of course she agreed. And the man that lived at this address had been accused of breaking into the house of an elderly couple in Dublin, California. But he had fled the scene before he was able to be caught and arrested. But it was actually everything that this man had left behind at this elderly couple's house that's what got him caught. Because this man had left things like zip ties, duct tapes, and even his cell phone at this elderly couple's house before he fled. Police were able to track those things down to one man, Matthew Mueller. Now, once Misty Caruso got to the South Lake Tahoe house to execute the search warrant, Matthew Mueller had barricaded himself inside the house, and the other officers on the scene had to, do their thing to get into the door. But once they got inside, Misty Caruso found things like the fact that the white Mustang sitting out front had the back seat removed, and it had very purposely been removed. She also found boxes of different license plates, a taser, and then there were also things like zip ties and duct tapes. And she even found Nerf guns with, cat lasers taped to the top of the toy guns. She found things like a penis pump, a blow-up sex doll, and an abnormally large container of Vaseline. We're all just going to use our imagination and keep moving. And it was also as if Misty Caruso had a sixth sense of the fact that something bad had happened within the walls of this house. And that's when she found a few pair of swim goggles with tape covering the lenses. And on one of those pairs of swim goggles, wrapped up in the head strap, was one singular long blonde hair. At this point, Misty Caruso wasn't sure who the hair belonged to, but she did know that it didn't belong to anyone that was involved in the case of the elderly people that she was working. But she was also sure that this wasn't a sex kink type of thing where you would wear goggles. It just seemed more dark and methodical than that. Matthew Mueller was arrested on scene and he never spoke a word. But he did use one of his feet to shut a laptop that was close by before the police walked him out in cuffs. So once Misty Caruso got back to her office, she sent out a bulletin to all the local authorities in surrounding cities and areas, just kind of asking if anyone had any unsolved cases involving either Mueller or a woman with long blonde hair. And while she waited on someone from another agency to get back to her, she ran Matthew Mueller's name. And when she did, she found a string of things that he was either connected to or suspected of. Things like a few different either attempted break-ins or successful break-ins and attempted sexual assaults. It was just a lot. But then in a lot of these cases, Matthew Mueller had forced women to drink NyQuil or NyQuil mixed with something else. Okay, is this starting to sound familiar yet? Good, good, good. Misty started getting calls from other departments in the area with either them being able to confirm or deny that, they had anything that they thought might be linked to Matthew Mueller. And she'd heard back from a lot of the different departments in the area except for Vallejo Police Department. Surprise, surprise. They still hadn't called her back. Now, Misty Caruso had been able to track Matthew Mueller to Vallejo because the Mustang that he'd been driving had been stolen from Vallejo. So when Misty had gotten in touch with the real owner of the Mustang, who Mueller had stolen it from, the real owner of the Mustang told Misty that he always thought that Mueller was somehow involved in the break-in of Aaron Quinn's house and the kidnapping of Denise Huskins. So what are the chances that this man's car stolen by Matthew Mueller, and he just so happens to follow Denise and Aaron's case and also think that Mueller's involved? Full circle. We're coming full circle. Now, the real owner of the stolen Mustang also told Misty that he and a bunch of other students had always thought Mueller was the Mare Island creeper. And Mare Island is just like a small section of California, but Mare Island is also where Aaron Quinn lived at the time that Denise was kidnapped. The real owner of the Mustang told Misty that everyone thought that he was the Mare Island creeper because he and a few of his friends had actually followed Matthew Mueller to a house where they caught him peeping into someone's windows taking pictures. Obviously, this group of people that followed Matthew Mueller called the police, but he also said that once Mueller realized that he had been seen and he was basically caught, the Peeping Tom incident stopped for a while. That was until they saw it later on the news that Denise had been kidnapped a few months later. So once Misty looked into the kidnapping of Denise Huskins a little more, she was completely shocked that Vallejo Police Department had publicly called this kidnapping a hoax on national TV for everybody who was watching. So Misty reached out to the Vallejo Police Department herself, and she was immediately redirected to the FBI. And when she got in touch with somebody at the FBI, she ended up getting in touch with the agent that Aaron's ex had been having an affair with for more than 2 years. But thank God he did his job, and he had a team of FBI agents go to Misty's office to collect all the evidence that had been found during the search warrant that was executed on Matthew Mueller's house. And of course, this could not stay silent for long. Soon after Matthew Mueller was arrested, the FBI affidavit was released to the public. And for the first time, Denise and Aaron were able to stand side by side with their attorneys as they released a statement about the most recent break in their case. Denise and Aaron were specifically asked if they wanted to be named in these affidavits, and they both said yes. But still, their names were never used. Instead, Denise was referred to as Victim F, which is where the title of their book comes from. And Aaron was only referred to as Victim M, and M for it don't make no damn sense. That don't even start with an M. So this affidavit wasn't an apology from Vallejo Police for their actions or their lack thereof. Instead, it was a way for them to make an excuse for why they jumped to conclusions and didn't just follow the evidence. But that's a whole different podcast for a whole different time, so let's keep going. During this affidavit, this was also the first time that it was written down that Aaron's phone did in fact have 3 missed calls from the kidnappers. It was also listed in this affidavit that once AT&T released the pinpointed tracking information of these 3 missed calls on Aaron's phone, those calls had come from less than 200 feet away from where Matthew Mueller had held Denise captive. But police had put Aaron's phone on airplane mode, so those calls never came through. Surprise, surprise. Now, all of this information just means that if police would have been doing their jobs, they would have been able to track down these missed calls and probably, most likely, would have found Denise being held against her will in that house in Lake Tahoe. And as it turns out, the phone that Matthew Mueller had left behind at the elderly couple's house that he had tried to break into, it was in his mommy's name, okay? And when police went to question his mommy told him that Matthew usually stayed at their family vacation home in Lake Tahoe, which is exactly where they was able to track Matthew's ass down at. Y'all, this case has got me kind of pissed off. Then police were trying to convince Aaron and Denise that Matthew Mueller had been working alone. But Denise and Aaron heard it with their own ears, more than one person walking around and moving about in the darkness of the night right before Denise was taken from Aaron's house. So this whole time, Denise and Aaron are like, actually, we know there's more than one person involved. And the police are like, nah, we really don't think so. And then Denise and Aaron find out that for about a month after Denise was released from her kidnappers, that Aaron's ex, Jennifer, had a bodyguard around her at all times, and she was being walked to and from her car when she was on duty at work. So why did Jennifer need a bodyguard if Vallejo Police Department thought that Aaron and Denise were behind this whole thing? Like, what reason would Jennifer need a bodyguard for if it was just Aaron and Denise behind this all? It just don't make no damn sense, y'all, but here we are. Now, towards the end of August, Denise gets a call from her lawyer, Doug. And Doug tells Denise that police have gone through Matthew Mueller's electronic evidence and that they found the 2 separate recordings of Denise being raped by Mueller. And Denise almost immediately thinks about the fact that she was forced to pretend that she enjoyed the rape. Because if you'll remember, Denise was told that it needed to look like consensual sex between a couple. And she was in survival mode, so that's exactly what she did. And then Denise catches word that Matthew Mueller had spoken to investigators and he'd told them that he had no accomplices. And that he was solely responsible for this entire thing, which Denise and Aaron both know is a bold-faced lie. They can't prove any differently, but they know that he did not work alone. And I know you've got to be thinking at this point, like, who is this Matthew Mueller and what's his story? And truthfully, I'm not wasting my oxygen and any of our time explaining much about him. I will say that he's probably not what you're imagining in your head. He didn't live in his mom's basement and jack off to stepsister porn. Well, actually, I don't know if he did that or not, but he was a Harvard graduate with a law degree. He was also a U.S. Marine. Now, he has since been disbarred and is a disgrace to everything our military stands for. So, let's get back to the real reason we're all here. Denise and Aaron, okay? Denise and Aaron are finally able to get a new house together, and Aaron's able to go back to Kaiser Hospital because he was a full-time employee. Before the kidnapping, Denise was only a resident, so the hospital never did let Denise go back to work, although she was finally able to take her final exam and pass it. Eventually, more than a year had passed since the kidnapping, and Denise and Aaron were trying to, move on with life as normal. Aaron got a job at a different hospital after their move, and Denise and Aaron attended couples therapy to ensure that they would have a healthy relationship after what they'd gone through. And it was really just a waiting game on what was happening next with Matthew Mueller and the case that was being built against him. And then in the spring of either 2015 or 2016, Denise was finally able to go back to work too. And this is also when Denise finally took the time to sit down and actually watch the movie Gone Girl. And even though it really pissed her off, it also gave her some sort of solace knowing that she wasn't the woman from the movie and that she never had been. This was something that they had tried to label her, but she had never given that label to herself. Matthew Mueller was eventually kind of offered a plea deal for 30 years in prison. And this is when people were trying to convince Denise and Aaron that Matthew Mueller had been the only person inside of Aaron's house that night, because police had found multiple audio recordings in Mueller's possession. And some of those recordings did kind of match the events that Denise and Aaron had recalled from the night of the kidnapping. This still doesn't convince Denise or Aaron either one that Matthew Mueller was working alone, and Denise said it in their book. If Mueller had been working alone, then she and Aaron would have been able to sleep better at night knowing that he was the only man responsible and that he was, behind bars and awaiting charges and trial. But they both knew with every fiber of their being that Mueller absolutely did not do this alone. There were for sure other people in the house besides just Denise, Aaron, and Matthew Mueller. Denise and Aaron were finally able to file a civil lawsuit against Vallejo Police Department and the city of Vallejo in March. And of course, they got a response asking them to drop the charges and the filings. And they literally said that Denise didn't, quote-unquote, act like a kidnap victim. I'm sorry, I don't even know what that means. After this, in September of 2016, Aaron and Denise are finally told that even though Matthew Mueller had been planning to use the insanity defense, that now he was planning to drop the insanity defense and that he had accepted a plea deal. If Matthew Mueller pled guilty to the charges of kidnapping, then the agreement was that the prosecution wouldn't go for more than a 40-year sentence. So the next step would be the sentencing hearing, and shortly after this, the agent that had been having an affair with Aaron's ex got a promotion, and Detective Mustard got awarded the Officer of the Year award. So it's just a lot happening around this time for Denise and Aaron. Nearly 2 years after the kidnapping, on March 16th, 2017, it was finally time for Matthew Mueller's sentencing hearing. And this was the first time that Denise had looked Mueller in the face, like face to face in the same room, with no swim goggles, no tape, no ties. Just eye to eye, face to face for the very first time. Mueller showed absolutely no emotion, and Denise watched as he took a seat. Mueller's defense team then tried to say that Mueller was the same as the woman outside the courthouse who was pushing a shopping cart and talking to herself. He was mentally ill and helpless. But that doesn't really add up to the amount of planning that had gone into the execution of this kidnapping. And even a life sentence was suggested, even though before this, Denise and Aaron were thinking that Mueller would probably only get about 30 to 40 years. But let's be real. We're all hoping for the death sentence at this point. Denise and Aaron are able to give their impact statements, and let me just tell you that both Denise and Aaron did their damn things with these victim impact statements. They are like raw, honest, heartfelt. They are exactly what everybody in that room needed to hear. I'll never be able to do these victim impact statements justice, so just know that if you get the book or the audiobook or whatever, it'll be chapter 51 in the book of Victim F, and just trust me, you'll want to hear these. You'll want to hear the whole thing. But I'm pretty sure if I would have read you their entire victim impact statements, that would be the exact definition of plagiarism. So I'm just going to tell you where to find them, and that would be chapter 51. Now, Denise didn't face the judge when she spoke during her victim impact statement. She turned her whole ass body around to look directly at Matthew Mueller. She gave her victim impact statement, and I feel like at this point, we should force perpetrators to look their victims in the face during their victim impact statements. A lot of these perpetrators can look at their victims while they're committing these crimes, but they're not given the same grace when it's their turn to face their victims. Matthew Mueller was sentenced to 40 years in prison in 2017 during the sentencing hearing for the kidnapping of Denise Huskins. And as a means of celebration, Aaron proposed to Denise on a vacation with all their closest friends and family around on this trip, and obviously, she said yes. She said yes to Aaron. She said yes to the dress. She said yes to life as Mrs. Aaron Quinn. Denise would go on to become certified as a victim's advocate, and Aaron's mom underwent some training that would allow her to be in the room with other women as a means of like emotional or mental support while women have to undergo rape kits and exams. Because that's not exactly something that you want your parents in the room for, but you probably also don't want to go through that experience alone. And as far as Aaron, he was able to start his own physical therapy business working with patients who were injured during like exercise or sports, and that's always been his dream and his goal. And then in 2020, more than 4 years after Denise was released from captivity, something else would happen that would change Aaron and Denise's lives forever. Because on March 25th, 2020, Denise and Aaron would welcome their first of 2 daughters to the world, who we're just going to refer to as Baby O, because that baby needs her privacy. Now, if Baby O's birthday of March 25th sounds familiar to you, that's because Baby O was actually born 5 years to the day of the day that Denise was released by The Voice, who we now know as Matthew Mueller. And then finally, in 2022, Matthew Mueller was given an additional 31 years for the rape of Denise and the robbery of both Aaron and Denise, along with the burglary of the house and the false imprisonment. But to end on a better note, Denise and Aaron had the wedding of their dreams, and since then, they welcomed their second daughter. And now, they're living their very own happily ever after. Now, as far as any accomplices that Matthew Mueller may have had, nothing has ever been proven, although Denise, Aaron, and both of their teams of highly trained, respected, and highly intelligent lawyers, all believe that Matthew Mueller did have help. I'm also pretty inclined to believe he had accomplices too. There's absolutely no way that Denise and Aaron both mistook recordings of footsteps and other people moving around Aaron's house that night. They just did not mistake recordings for real noises and real people. You can sense when somebody's in the room with you. You can sense when you're being watched. There had to be more than just Matthew Mueller inside of that house that night. I do not care. And then to add to that, remember the guy that the voice had told Denise would be coming in to sit with her while he was gone, while she was in captivity? Like, he told her, hey, you probably want to act like you're asleep because that guy's probably not going to be as nice as me. And she was like, hey, let me get some sedatives. And he was like, okay, sure. What about that guy? I don't know. There are just for sure other people out there that are involved in this kidnapping and ransom. And I'm going to say all this allegedly, of course, because the JonBenet Ramsey case taught me everything I've learned about making accusations about people without having cold hard facts to back up the allegations. So with that, I allegedly, wholeheartedly believe that other people are involved in this case and probably other cases. And Denise's lawyer, Doug, says that later on, while Matthew Mueller's conviction and sentencing was still in limbo, that he'd run into another attorney that Doug was friends with, and that friend was working on a case of a couple of men who were caught breaking into houses on Mare Island. And again, Mare Island is pretty small, like as far as California as a whole goes. And Aaron's house at the time of the break-in was also in Mare Island. And most criminals, especially burglars, don't hit the same houses in the same small areas over and over and over again because that's how you get caught. So for these men to only be breaking into houses on Mare Island and nowhere else, it just seems a little fishy to Doug, and it sounds a little fishy to me too. But aside from that, just a thought, when Matthew Mueller was first arrested, police took all of his electronics in as evidence, right? Okay, so tell me why those 2 emails that were sent to police from the kidnappers were not on Mueller's electronics anywhere, ever. Because he had accomplices, that's why. That is why. And that is all I have for you this week. I'm going to pull up a review of the week, and if y'all don't start leaving some reviews, I'm stopping this series, I swear to God. Let me go find one, though. This review of the week comes from Facebook, from Tara Moyer, thank you, and it says, most amazing part of my week. I'm a mail carrier, and there's nothing better than a sunny day with Mama Murdered a Podcast in my ear. I could not agree more, girl. Always a good story and told in a great way. I know that I'll always get a great episode. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for leaving a review. And with this, y'all know what time it is. Go get them badass kids from school. But before we do that, let's make sure we all going to do it again. Same time, same place, next Wednesday. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.